The ballroom fell silent when her voice cut through the velvet air. Trembling, defiant, unforgettable. In a world where everyone feared him, a single black waitress dared to humiliate the Arab billionaire CEO. And nothing would ever be the same again. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another story just as powerful and emotional as this one. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. The city skyline glittered with arrogance that night. From the penthouse windows of the Al Rashid Tower, the world seemed small, obedient, like an empire contained beneath glass. At its pinnacle stood Karim Al Rashid, the Arab billionaire CEO everyone feared. His reputation preceded him into every room. Sharp as the cut of his tailored suit, untouchable as the steel gates of his estates, he had built his empire on discipline, intimidation, and ruthless perfection. His silence alone had weight. At meetings, board members stuttered. At galas, whispers followed him like shadows. He never needed to raise his voice. A single glance, narrowed and cutting, could unravel the confidence of seasoned politicians. Yet behind that iron mask was a man who hadn't laughed in years. Loneliness, though never admitted, echoed in the halls of his lavish home. He was surrounded by diamonds, but none warmed him. Power fed his pride, but it starved his heart. Tonight was another night of dominance. The ballroom at the Grand Marlowe Hotel shimmered with chandeliers, violins, and the clink of champagne flutes. A sea of silk gowns and tuxedos bowed, figuratively if not literally, before Karim. Guests watched him with awe, with fear, with the tight smiles of those who knew better than to displease the lion in the room. Across that same ballroom, invisible to most eyes, a young waitress hurried between tables, balancing trays with the practiced grace of exhaustion. Her name was Ayanna. 24, with tired eyes that hid sparks of wit, she was one of many dressed in crisp black uniforms, her presence meant to blur into the background. But Ayanna was not invisible to herself. Every step she took carried the weight of survival. Rent overdue, her younger brother's tuition unpaid, her dreams of becoming a writer buried beneath double shifts and rude customers. Her palms burned from carrying heavy trays. Her smile, when offered, was often unreturned. And yet, she carried a dignity that no paycheck could buy. Even in silence, there was a fierceness in the way she held her head, a quiet refusal to be erased. As she passed table after table, Ayanna overheard snippets of shallow conversations. Stock portfolios, yacht sizes, vacations in Dubai. It all sounded so far from her reality of cramped apartments and late-night bus rides. But tonight was just another shift, another evening where her job was to serve, smile, and stay unnoticed. At the far end of the ballroom, Karim's eyes swept the room like a predator assessing territory. He had just signed a deal worth billions, and yet his jaw remained tight, his gaze restless. The applause he had received on the stage only minutes ago already felt like dust. Praise never satisfied him. It only made him hunger for the next conquest. And then it happened, a flicker, a near stumble. Ayanna, weaving between guests, nearly collided with him. The tray in her hands rattled, crystal glasses threatening to fall. She caught herself just in time, whispering a quick apology without even daring to look at the man she had almost drenched in champagne. But Karim looked at her. For a fraction of a second, his cold eyes landed on hers. The moment was brief, a spark, nothing more, but something shifted. Her gaze, unlike the others, did not lower in immediate submission. She met his eyes, just for a breath, and though her lips pressed into silence, the message was clear. I am not afraid of you. Karim's brow furrowed ever so slightly. It was rare for anyone to hold his gaze, especially someone in a waitress's uniform. She was gone in an instant, weaving back into the blur of servants, but her defiance lingered in his mind like the aftertaste of strong coffee. The night carried on with its predictable rhythm. Laughter rising from tables, business cards exchanged, champagne flowing. Kareem returned to his throne-like posture at the head of the hall, while Ayanna returned to the shadows of service. And yet, the collision was inevitable. The feared CEO and the unseen waitress had crossed paths for the first time. The air in the ballroom had shifted ever so slightly, like the calm before a storm. Have you ever locked eyes with someone and felt, even for a moment, that your life was about to change? Share your experience in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. The ballroom swelled with noise, a careful symphony of violins, polite laughter, and the clink of silverware against porcelain. Waiters glided through like shadows, placing dishes in front of guests whose conversations barely paused to acknowledge them. At the head table sat Kareem al-Rashid, posture regal, expression unbending. He leaned back in his chair as though the world itself existed to amuse him, his every glance commanding attention. A young executive beside him cracked a joke, and though Kareem's lips never moved, the entire table erupted with forced laughter, eager to prove themselves worthy. Fear was power. Kareem knew this. He thrived on it. But fear also demanded maintenance, and tonight, he felt the subtle fraying of its edge. A mistake, however small, could not be tolerated. Not in his presence. That mistake came in the form of a trembling hand. One of the junior waiters, no older than 19, approached the table with a tray of desserts. His movements were stiff, rehearsed, but his nerves betrayed him. The tray tipped ever so slightly, sending a stream of molten chocolate sauce splattering onto the pristine white tablecloth, just inches from Kareem's tailor jacket. The boy froze. The table froze. Every eye darted toward Kareem. Silence fell like glass shattering. Kareem turned his head slowly, his jaw tight, his expression carved from stone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His cold stare pinned the boy in place, sweat already gathering at the young man's temples. "Pathetic," Kareem murmured, just loud enough for the table to hear. "If you can't carry a tray, you shouldn't serve at all." The words were knives. The boy's face went pale. Guests shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Fear hung heavier than the chandelier above them. And then it happened. From the periphery, a voice cut through the silence. Soft at first, then clear, trembling yet unshakable. "Maybe," the voice said, "if people didn't treat waiters like machines, mistakes wouldn't feel like crimes." The air cracked. Heads turned. Ayanna stood just a few paces away, tray balanced on one hand. Her eyes locked not on the boy but on Kareem himself. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her pulse thundering in her ears, but she didn't back down. Kareem's brows arched slightly. A challenge. Guests whispered behind their hands, shock rippling through the room. No one spoke to Kareem al-Rashid like that. No one. "You have something to say." Kareem's voice was measured, deadly calm. Ayanna swallowed, every instinct screaming at her to apologize, to retreat, but the sight of the trembling boy, the way Kareem's words had crushed him, lit a fire she couldn't extinguish. "Yes," she said, her voice steadying. "It's easy to sit there in a $1,000 suit and belittle someone doing their best. Harder to remember you were once human yourself." A gasp surged through the ballroom. Forks dropped, champagne glasses froze midair. Kareem's eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, someone had stripped him of the armor he wore so effortlessly. Humiliation seared his pride like acid. He rose slowly from his chair, his imposing frame casting a shadow over her. "What did you just say?" Ayanna's tray shook in her hand, but her gaze didn't falter. "You heard me." It wasn't just the words. It was the defiance in her eyes, the refusal to cower like everyone else. And the strangest thing happened. Silence stretched, the entire room waiting for his retaliation, but Kareem said nothing. He stared at her, his jaw tight, his hand flexing at his side, as though torn between fury and something else he couldn't name. Ayanna felt her chest tighten, but she didn't move. For one eternal moment, it was just the two of them, the feared billionaire and the invisible waitress, locked in a battle of wills before an audience that couldn't believe what it was seeing. Then, without a word, Kareem sat back down. The room exhaled in relief. Conversation picked back up in hushed tones, but the tension lingered like smoke. Ayanna turned sharply on her heel, walking back toward the service corridor, her legs trembling beneath her but her head held high. She didn't know if she'd still have a job tomorrow, but in that instant she didn't care. She had spoken and the world had heard. And Kareem. He watched her disappear into the crowd, his mind a storm. Humiliation burned in his chest, but beneath it pulsed something more dangerous. Intrigue. For the first time in years, someone had dared to embarrass him. And instead of crushing her instantly, he found himself replaying her words, the fire in her eyes. It unsettled him. It fascinated him. And it would not be forgotten. Do you think Ayanna was right to speak up, even at the risk of losing everything? Or should she have stayed silent to protect herself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's debate this moment. The moment replayed in Ayanna's mind long after the last plate was cleared and the ballroom emptied of its glittering crowd. Her words. His stare. The silence that stretched like a blade. She leaned against the stainless steel counter in the staff kitchen, her tray abandoned, her hands pressed against her face. What had she done? The buzz of the industrial fridge and the hum of fluorescent lights felt deafening after the suffocating silence of the ballroom. "Girl, are you crazy?" her coworker Tasha hissed, rushing in behind her. "Do you even know who that man is?" Ayanna dropped her hands, her eyes still wide, her chest still heaving. "I know exactly who he is. And I know what he said to that boy was cruel. Cruel. Honey, that man could have your whole life shut down before tomorrow. You think people like him forget? You embarrassed him in front of half the city's elite." Ayanna's throat tightened. She knew Tasha was right. She'd risked everything with those words. Rent money, her brother's tuition, her mother's medication. All of it balanced on this job. She could already imagine the manager's call, the cold apology, the words, "We have to let you go." And yet, her fists clenched. "I'm tired of people like him thinking they can walk all over us." Someone had to say something. Tasha shook her head, muttering under her breath, but Ayanna caught the flicker of admiration in her friend's eyes before she turned away. Meanwhile, in the back of his limousine, Kareem sat in brooding silence as the city lights streaked by his window. His driver, accustomed to the billionaire's moods, didn't utter a word. But Kareem's mind was anything but quiet. The humiliation cut deep. It wasn't just that she had challenged him. It was that she had done it publicly. He could feel the whispers already spreading through the city. The invincible CEO, silenced by a waitress. He'd built his empire on respect born of fear, and she had cracked the foundation with a single act of defiance. His jaw tightened. He couldn't let this stand. And yet, her words echoed in his head like an unwelcome refrain. Harder to remember you were once human yourself. Human. When was the last time anyone had spoken to him as if he were human? Not as an untouchable titan, not as a ruthless dealmaker, but as a man. He hated the sting of truth in it. He hated even more that he couldn't stop thinking about her. The following morning, Ayanna dragged herself out of bed in her cramped apartment. Her stomach knotted with dread. Her younger brother Malik sat at the table, hunched over a math textbook, his face tired from late-night studying. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said without looking up. "I didn't," she admitted, pouring herself instant coffee into a chipped mug. "What happened?" She hesitated, then sighed. I might have mouthed off to my boss's boss's boss. The kind of boss who owns half the city. Malik's head snapped up, eyes wide. Ayanna, no. She forced a shaky laugh. Relax. I didn't get fired yet. But I probably will. Then why'd you do it? She leaned against the counter, watching her brother's face, so young yet so burdened by their circumstances. Because he was tearing down some kid for spilling chocolate. Like his pride was worth more than that boy's dignity. I couldn't just stand there. Malik shook his head, torn between worry and pride. You're gonna get us both in trouble one day, you know that? Maybe, she said, smiling faintly. But at least I'll get in trouble standing for something. Still, her hands trembled as she gripped her mug. Principles didn't pay rent. Courage didn't keep the lights on. And pride didn't buy Malik's textbooks. At Al Rashid Enterprises, the incident had already reached the ears of Kareem's board. In hushed phone calls and discreet meetings, they speculated on whether his authority had been compromised. Power was perception, and perception was everything. Kareem sat at the head of the conference table, his presence heavy. The room buzzed with numbers, reports, projections, but his mind kept straying. Sir, one executive finally ventured. About last night. Perhaps we should take steps to ensure nothing like that happens again. Kareem's eyes lifted, cold and sharp. What do you suggest? The man cleared his throat. Dismiss the staff member. Make an example of her. Dismiss her. Crush her. Erase the humiliation. It would be easy. A single phone call. One stroke of his pen, and Ayanna would vanish back into the obscurity where she belonged. But for reasons he couldn't articulate, Kareem hesitated. His silence stretched too long, and the executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Kareem stood, his voice low. Focus on the merger. Leave the staff to me. That evening, Ayanna arrived for her shift with her heart pounding. The manager called her into his office, his expression unreadable. She braced for the words. Pack your things. You're done here. Instead, he leaned back, folding his hands. The CEO has requested you personally for the next series of events. Ayanna blinked. Requested me? Her stomach sank. This wasn't mercy. This was punishment. The manager's voice lowered. Careful. Ayanna, whatever happened last night, I don't know how you walked away with your job. But if I were you, I'd tread carefully. Men like him don't forget. That night, as Ayanna tied her apron and adjusted her tray, she felt the weight of his unseen eyes already on her. Her defiance had made her visible, and visibility was dangerous. From the balcony above, Kareem watched her enter the ballroom again. She moved with determination, but he could see the stiffness in her shoulders, the tremor she tried to hide. He hated her for the humiliation. He hated her for making him think of humanity, of things he'd buried long ago. But more than anything, he hated that he couldn't look away. When you stand up to power and face the fallout, is it worth it if it costs you everything? Would you risk stability for dignity? Share your thoughts. This is where Ayanna stands now. The Grand Marlowe chandeliers glittered again, but this time, Ayanna's hands shook as she adjusted her apron in the service corridor. She could feel the weight of her co-workers' eyes on her, whispers trailing in her wake. That's the one, someone muttered. The waitress who mouthed off to him. Another snickered nervously. Bet she won't last the week. Ayanna gritted her teeth. She hadn't asked to be infamous. She hadn't asked to become that girl, the one who embarrassed Kareem al-Rashid. And yet, here she was, summoned again. The manager appeared, his expression pinched. Al-Rashid's table. He requested you specifically. Her stomach dropped. Of course he had. When she stepped into the ballroom, it was déjà vu. Glittering gowns, tuxedos, the hum of wealth filling the air. But this time, Ayanna was not invisible. Guests turned to look at her, curious, murmuring. She felt exposed, like a specimen under glass. At the head table, Kareem sat waiting. His eyes found her immediately. Dark, unreadable, sharp as obsidian. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. But his gaze lingered like a challenge. Ayanna forced herself forward, setting down glasses with precision. Her movements mechanical. She would do the job. Nothing more. Nothing less. Careful, Kareem murmured when she leaned closer to set his drink, his voice so low only she could hear. We wouldn't want another scene. Her jaw clenched. Then maybe you should try treating people like people. His eyes flickered, a spark of surprise, quickly masked. Still bold, even with your job dangling by a thread. She met his stare head-on. Maybe some things are worth more than a job. For a second, their eyes locked, the tension palpable. Guests at the table glanced between them, sensing something they couldn't name. Kareem leaned back, his lips curving ever so slightly. Not in amusement, but in intrigue. Later that evening, fate conspired again. A sudden downpour trapped the staff after the gala, flooding the streets outside. Guests were ushered into chauffeured cars, but the employees were forced to wait in the hotel's loading bay. Ayanna stood with her co-workers, shivering as rain pelted the pavement. The buses were delayed, and the night stretched endlessly. "Miss," a voice cut through the rain. She turned. A sleek black car idled at the curb, and beside it, holding an umbrella, was Kareem. Ayanna blinked. "You've got to be kidding me." "You'll catch pneumonia," he said flatly. "Get in." She crossed her arms. "I'll wait." Rainwater dripped from the edge of his umbrella, darkening his suit. His jaw tightened. "Stubbornness isn't strength, waitress. Pride won't keep you dry. And control won't fix everything, CEO," she shot back. For a moment, neither moved. The storm raged, thunder cracking above them, and Ayanna's resolve began to falter as her clothes soaked through. Finally, with a muttered curse under her breath, she slid into the car. The interior smelled of leather and cedar, warm and dry against the chaos outside. Kareem followed, shutting the door behind him. The silence between them was heavier than the rain. "Why?" she asked finally, arms crossed tight. "Why what? Why request me? Why not just fire me like everyone expected?" Kareem studied her, his gaze unreadable. "Do you think I'm so fragile that your words could destroy me?" "No," she said. "I think you're too proud to admit they got under your skin." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile but not quite. "You're reckless. And you're used to people bowing. Sorry if I broke your routine." Silence again, filled only by the hiss of rain against the windows. Kareem's hand drummed lightly against his knee, a restless rhythm. "You're not invisible anymore," he said finally. "Do you understand that?" Ayanna frowned. "I never wanted to be invisible. But I also didn't want this." "Then perhaps," he said softly, "you shouldn't have challenged me." Their eyes met, and in that instant, Ayanna saw something flicker beneath his hard exterior. Not anger, not arrogance, but something rawer. Loneliness, maybe. Wound upon wound hidden beneath the steel. She looked away quickly, her chest tightening. The ride stretched long, thick with silence and unspoken tension. When the car finally pulled up outside her apartment building, Ayanna reached for the door handle without a word. "Wait," Kareem said suddenly. She froze. His voice was low, careful. "You're not what I expected." Ayanna turned, her hand still on the handle. "Good. I'd hate to be predictable." And with that, she stepped out into the rain, leaving Kareem watching her retreat with an unfamiliar heaviness in his chest. That night, as Ayanna lay awake in her small apartment, the sound of rain still echoing against the windows, she replayed the car ride again and again. His words, his stare, the strange, dangerous current between them. She didn't trust him. She didn't like him. But something about him lingered, like a shadow she couldn't shake. And Kareem, pacing the polished floors of his penthouse, felt the same. She was under his skin, not just because she had embarrassed him, but because she refused to disappear like everyone else. It infuriated him. It fascinated him. And it meant their paths would collide again. The following week blurred into long shifts and quiet tension. Ayanna thought perhaps the storm had passed, that Kareem would lose interest in reminding her of her defiance. But fate, or Kareem himself, had other plans. Another gala. Another roster of the city's powerful. And once again, Ayanna's name was specifically listed on Kareem's request sheet. When she saw it, her stomach sank. She considered quitting right there, handing over her apron, but quitting wasn't an option. Malik's tuition notice sat on the counter at home, red ink screaming past due. So she went. The ballroom shimmered again, but Ayanna had stopped noticing its beauty. She saw instead the exhaustion etched into the staff's faces, the way their smiles stiffened with each entitled request. As she wove between tables, she caught sight of Kareem. He sat not at the head table this time but slightly apart, speaking to a foreign diplomat in low tones. His expression was tight, almost weary, though he covered it well. Later, in the service corridor, Ayanna found herself alone, refilling pitchers. She didn't notice Kareem until his voice cut through the quiet. "You hold your tray like a shield." She startled, nearly spilling water. "Do you sneak up on everyone, or just the people you've made miserable?" He ignored the jab, stepping closer. "Who are you, Ayanna?" She froze. "Excuse me. You challenge me as if you have nothing to lose. Yet you serve tables like someone carrying the weight of the world. Which is it?" Her chest tightened. "Why do you care?" He studied her for a long moment, his gaze searching. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her trembling with frustration. It was later that night, during cleanup, that Ayanna stumbled upon a clue to the man behind the mask. The ballroom had emptied, and she was clearing the head table when she noticed a leather-bound notebook left behind near Kareem's chair. She hesitated, then curiosity tugged. She flipped it open, not to words but to a photograph tucked inside. A boy of perhaps 10 years old, standing stiffly in front of a grand estate. His eyes were the same as Kareem's, dark, guarded, too old for his age. Beside him stood a man who looked stern, almost cold, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder like a weight rather than comfort. Ayanna's breath caught. "Put it down." She turned sharply. Kareem stood in the doorway, his gaze locked on the photograph. "I wasn't," she began, but his eyes silenced her. He crossed the room, plucking the notebook from her hands with deliberate calm. "Curiosity," he said softly, "is more dangerous than defiance." Ayanna's cheeks burned. "I didn't mean." "You've seen enough," he cut in. But his voice wasn't angry. It was something else. Tired. She searched his face, and for the first time saw a crack in his armor. "That was you, wasn't it?" "The boy." His jaw tightened. He slipped the notebook into his jacket, his eyes flicking away. "Leave it." And he walked out, his footsteps echoing against marble floors. The next evening, Kareem found himself alone in his penthouse, staring at that same photograph. His father's face glared back at him from the glossy paper, stern and unyielding. He remembered the endless lessons, the pressure, the words drilled into him. Power or nothing. Fear or weakness. To be respected, you must never be loved. He had believed it. He had built his empire on it. But Ayana's words, her defiance, had shaken something he thought long buried. He closed the notebook with a snap, his chest tight. Back in her apartment, Ayana sat with Malik, who was struggling through his homework. "You're distracted," he said finally, glancing up. She sighed. "Work." He frowned. "The CEO again?" Her eyes narrowed. "Why do you say that?" "Because every time you come home from those events, you look like you've seen a ghost." Ayana hesitated. "Maybe I have. Or maybe I've seen a man who's forgotten what it means to be human." Malik leaned back, studying her. "Or maybe you're seeing more of him than you want to admit." Her cheeks warmed. "Don't start." But deep down, she knew her brother was right. The following night, Kareem arrived at the hotel earlier than usual. He found Ayana in the staff hall, preparing trays. She looked up, startled, her eyes narrowing. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "Because I don't like unfinished things," he said. She frowned. "And what exactly is unfinished between us?" His gaze softened, just slightly. "You've seen pieces of me no one else dares to see. That makes you dangerous. Or unnecessary." Her pulse quickened. "I'm not your project. Or your weakness." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Then what are you?" For a heartbeat she didn't answer. Because she didn't know. And for the first time, she wondered if she wanted to. That night, as the gala wound down, Ayana found herself glancing across the room at Kareem more than once. And every time, his eyes found hers too, as though some invisible tether had formed between them. The humiliation that had started it all still lingered, but now it was tangled with something else. Curiosity, vulnerability, an unspoken pull neither could deny. The rain had returned, steady and soft, as Ayana left the hotel late one evening. She pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders, her bag slung across her body. The street lamps buzzed weakly, casting halos onto the slick pavement. She had just reached the bus stop when a familiar car pulled up beside her. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Kareem's unreadable eyes. "You'll be waiting an hour," he said, nodding toward the empty street. "I don't mind waiting," she replied, though her teeth were already chattering. "Get in." She hesitated, glancing at the bus sign as though it might save her. But the rain soaked through her coat, chilling her to the bone. With a sigh, she stepped into the car. Inside, warmth enveloped her. The leather seats, the subtle scent of cedarwood, the quiet hum of the engine. All of it clashed against her reality of buses and second-hand furniture. She sat stiffly, arms crossed. "You don't owe me rides," she muttered. "Consider it insurance," Kareem said, his gaze fixed on the road as the driver pulled away. "Insurance for what?" "That you don't collapse before the next event," he said evenly. Ayana rolled her eyes. "Always business with you, isn't it?" For the first time, his lips curved, not in arrogance, but in something almost resembling amusement. "You make it sound like a curse." "Maybe it is," she shot back, but her voice softened. The car ride was quiet for a time. The rain tapped gently against the windows, the city lights blurring into streaks. Then, unexpectedly, Kareem spoke. "My father used to say love is weakness." Ayana blinked, caught off guard. That's bleak. He believed fear commanded respect. That kindness invited betrayal. His jaw tightened. "I believed him. For too long." She studied him, his profile etched against the passing lights. For once, he looked less like the untouchable CEO and more like the boy from the photograph. Trapped, burdened. "Do you still believe it?" she asked softly. His silence stretched. Finally, he said, "I'm starting to wonder if he was wrong." The words hung between them, fragile and raw. Ayana's chest tightened. She wanted to reach out to touch his hand, but she curled her fingers into her lap instead. The car stopped outside her apartment building, but she didn't move immediately. "You know," she said quietly, "my mother used to tell me the opposite. That love is the only thing strong enough to keep us standing when everything else falls apart." Kareem turned to her, his gaze steady. "And do you believe her?" "Yes," Ayana whispered. "Because I've lived it. I wouldn't have survived without love. Not the romantic kind, but the kind that feeds you when you're hungry, that keeps you from giving up. My family's love is the only reason I'm still here." He absorbed her words in silence, something shifting behind his eyes. When she finally reached for the door handle, he said quietly, "You're not what I expected." She smiled faintly. "Good." And with that, she slipped into the rain. The next evening, another event. This time, the atmosphere between them felt different. During a lull, Ayana found herself standing near Kareem as he stepped away from the crowd. His tie was loosened, his shoulders less rigid. For once, he seemed tired, human. "Long night?" she asked before she could stop herself. He glanced at her and something softened. "Long life." Despite herself, she laughed. "That's dramatic." His lips curved again, the faintest smile. "You've got a sharp tongue. And you've got a soft spot, whether you admit it or not." He tilted his head, studying her. Dangerous to suggest such things. "Dangerous or true," she teased. For a moment, they stood there, laughter bubbling between them, quiet but real. The sound felt foreign to Kareem, like a forgotten melody, and it unsettled him in the best way. Later, when the crowd thinned, Ayana stepped out onto the balcony for air. The city sprawled below, lights shimmering against the night. She didn't hear Kareem approach until he stood beside her, his presence a quiet weight. "Beautiful view," she murmured. "Indeed," he said, though his gaze was fixed not on the city but on her. She felt it, the intensity of his stare, and her breath caught. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "Why do you keep seeking me out?" Kareem's voice was low, almost reluctant. "Because you don't fear me. Because you see me when no one else does." Her heart thudded. She turned to him, meeting his gaze, and for once there was no defiance, no pride, only truth. "I see you," she whispered. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken things. Their faces were close, too close, the air charged. But before the moment could break, a staff member called Ayana's name from inside. She stepped back, her chest tight, her cheeks warm. "I should go." Kareem watched her leave, his heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night, as Ayana lay awake, she couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, the way he had looked at her as though she were more than just a waitress, more than just invisible. And Kareem, alone in his penthouse, replayed her laughter, her words, her gaze that cut through the walls he had built his entire life. It scared him. It thrilled him. And it left him wondering if love was not weakness, but the very thing he had been missing all along. The next gala was larger than any Ayana had seen before. Diplomats, celebrities, investors. The world's eyes seemed fixed on Kareem. Ayana told herself she'd keep her head down, do her job, avoid him. But avoiding him had become impossible. Their conversations lingered in her mind. His eyes haunted her. His voice echoed in the quiet. Still, tonight was different. Something in the air was sharp, tense, as if the walls themselves were listening. Halfway through the evening, Ayana noticed a woman at Kareem's side. She was tall, elegant, wrapped in diamonds, her hand resting casually on Kareem's arm as though it belonged there. Ayana's chest tightened. She had no right to feel anything. No claim, no promise had ever been made. Yet jealousy burned hot and merciless. She tried to ignore it, but the whispers around the room cut through. His fiancée has arrived from Dubai. Perfect match. Wealth marrying wealth. They say he's been engaged for years. Ayana's tray wobbled in her hand. She steadied it quickly, forcing a polite smile as she served champagne. But inside, her heart was cracking. Later, when Karim caught her eye across the room, she looked away, pretending not to see him. But he crossed the distance anyway, his presence commanding even in the crowded hall. "You're avoiding me," he said lowly when they met near the service doors. "I'm working," she replied flatly. His gaze narrowed. "You're angry." "Why would I be?" She forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. "You have your life, I have mine. Seems we've both remembered our places." His jaw tightened. "It isn't what it looks like." "Oh." Her eyes flashed. "Because it looks like the man who preaches about truth has been hiding a fiancé this whole time." The words struck him. His silence was all the confirmation she needed. Her throat burned. "You know, for a moment I thought you were different. That underneath all that arrogance there was someone real." "Ayana." "No," she snapped, her voice breaking. "You're just like the rest. Power first. Image first. And people like me. We're entertainment at best, disposable at worst." The hallway was silent except for the echo of her words. Karim's chest tightened. He wanted to explain, to tell her the engagement was an arrangement he'd never chosen, a contract written by family expectation and politics. But pride, his oldest defense, coiled around him like chains. So instead of reaching for her, he said coldly, "Perhaps you should remember the line between employer and staff." The instant the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Ayana's eyes widened, pain flashing across her face before she turned sharply, disappearing into the kitchen. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Ayana worked mechanically, her body moving while her heart fractured. Karim, meanwhile, stood among investors and dignitaries, his mind nowhere near the deals being discussed. He replayed their exchange over and over, each repetition twisting the knife deeper. But his pride held him back. Approaching her now, in front of everyone, would mean exposing weakness, something he had sworn never to do. So he stayed silent. And silence was worse than any dagger. At the end of the night, Ayana slipped out the back, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She walked quickly, her eyes stinging, her throat tight. Her phone buzzed with a text from Malik. How was work? She stared at it, unable to reply. How could she explain that the man who terrified an empire had somehow found a way to break her heart? She shoved the phone back into her bag and kept walking, the city lights blurring through her tears. Karim didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, the photograph of his younger self on the desk, Ayana's words echoing in the room. "You're just like the rest." He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. He stood by the window, staring at the skyline, and for the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless. Because she was right. He had let pride, image, and fear choke the truth out of him. And in doing so, he had destroyed the one fragile bond that had felt real. 2 days passed. Ayana avoided the events she was assigned to, trading shifts with other staff whenever Karim's name was on the roster. When Malik noticed her silence at home, she brushed it off. But one evening he pressed. "You've been quiet for days," he said gently. Ayana forced a smile. "Just tired." "You like him, don't you?" Malik's voice was soft but steady. Her chest tightened. "It doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because men like him don't end up with women like me." Her voice cracked. "Because I let myself believe for a second that I mattered to someone who never saw me as anything more than a waitress who got lucky enough to catch his attention." Malik frowned. "Maybe you should let him explain." She shook her head. He already did. Loud and clear. Meanwhile, in his office, Kareem sat through meeting after meeting, his mind elsewhere. His staff noticed the change. His sharpness dulled, his temper muted. But when one of his advisors mentioned his fiancée in casual passing, Kareem's jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He excused himself, pacing the length of his private suite, his chest burning. He thought of Ayana's defiant eyes, her trembling hands, her voice breaking as she accused him. And he knew he had lost her. Unless. But the thought of reaching out felt impossible. Pride screamed against it. Fear of vulnerability clawed at him. So he stayed silent. And silence widened the distance into an abyss. That week ended with both of them more alone than they had been at the start. Ayana, nursing heartbreak she never expected. Kareem, shackled by the same pride that had been drilled into him since childhood. The bond they had begun to build now lay shattered, fragile pieces scattered between them, sharp enough to cut if either dared to pick them up. And neither did. Ayana sat at her small kitchen table, the weak light from the overhead bulb spilling across the wood. A cup of tea cooled untouched in front of her. Malik had gone to bed hours ago, leaving the apartment wrapped in silence. She traced the rim of the mug with her finger, her thoughts circling like restless birds. She remembered Kareem's words, cold, clipped, cutting. Perhaps you should remember the line between employer and staff. It still stung, still made her chest ache, but beneath the anger something else gnawed at her. The memory of his eyes before the fight, the way he'd looked at her on the balcony, as though she was the only person in the world who saw him. She pressed her palms to her eyes, groaning softly. "Why did I let myself care?" she whispered to the empty room. Why did I believe him? The truth she didn't want to admit was simple. Because she had seen the boy under the armor, the man beneath the arrogance. And she had fallen, hard and fast. Now the question remained. Was she strong enough to walk away? Or brave enough to fight for something that could break her all over again? On the other side of the city, Kareem stood alone in his penthouse, the city's skyline sprawling beneath him like a sea of lights. The glass in his hand was untouched, condensation sliding down its side. He had been staring out for hours, caught between two worlds, the fortress of pride his father built around him, and the fragile hope Ayana had stirred within him. Her words echoed in his mind. Love is the only thing strong enough to keep us standing when everything else falls apart. He gripped the glass tighter, his jaw set. For years, he had lived by rules that demanded control, fear, dominance. He had thought love was weakness. Tenderness was folly. But Ayana, the waitress who had dared to humiliate him in front of a room full of power, had proven him wrong at every turn. And when she walked away, the silence left behind had gutted him more than any boardroom loss, more than any betrayal he had faced in business. For the first time in his life, Kareem was terrified. Not of failure, not of enemies, but of losing her. The following morning, Ayana dragged herself to work, though every step felt heavy. She told herself she would keep her head down, avoid him, finish her shifts. But fate, cruel and unrelenting, had other plans. Kareem was already there. He stood near the ballroom entrance, surrounded by his usual orbit of assistants and guards. Yet his eyes scanned the room with an intensity that betrayed his focus was elsewhere. When they landed on her, her stomach flipped. Ayana quickly ducked into the staff hallway, her pulse racing. Moments later, she heard the echo of his footsteps. Ayana. She froze, her back against the wall, eyes closed. She wanted to keep walking, to let pride hold her upright. But his voice, low, weighted with something she had never heard before, rooted her in place. Slowly, she turned. He stood a few feet away, his usual mask cracked, his eyes burning with something raw. "We need to talk," he said. Her chest ached. "There's nothing left to say." There is, Kareem countered. His voice wasn't cold this time. It was quiet, almost pleading. I owe you the truth. Ayanna crossed her arms, holding herself together. The truth? You mean the truth that you're engaged? The truth that I was just a distraction? His jaw tightened. It's not like that. The engagement was arranged years ago. Politics, family expectations, things I never wanted. It was never love. Her breath caught, but she held her glare. And you couldn't tell me that? Instead, you let me think I was just... Her voice broke. Just some game to you. Kareem stepped closer, his voice trembling at the edges. You were never a game. You're the only real thing I've had in years. The words hit her like a blow, leaving her breathless. But pride whispered in her ear, don't believe him. Protect yourself. Her heart, however, whispered louder. This is the man who let you see him, who listened when no one else did, who held your pain as though it mattered. Ayanna's eyes burned with unshed tears. Do you even know what you're asking of me? She whispered. To stand beside you, to trust you, when the world already sees me as less than nothing? Kareem's chest rose and fell, his gaze steady. I'm asking you to see me not as a billionaire, not as the man they fear, but as the boy who never knew love until you. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Ayanna turned her face away, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. She had a choice. Walk away, keep her pride, and carry the ache of what could have been. Or leap, reckless, dangerous, terrifying, into the possibility of love. That night, Ayanna found herself pacing her small room, Malik watching from the couch. You're wearing the floor out, he said lightly. She stopped, rubbing her face. He said I'm the only real thing he's had in years. Malik tilted his head. And how did that make you feel? Ayanna hesitated, tears welling. Like I can't breathe without him. And like trusting him might destroy me. Malik's smile was gentle. Maybe that's what love feels like, terrifying and necessary all at once. Meanwhile, Kareem sat in his car outside her building, staring at the darkened windows. He didn't step out, didn't call. But for the first time, he wanted to. He wanted to fight for something not with money, not with power, but with truth. He closed his eyes, leaning back against the seat. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow, he would give her the choice she deserved. And if she walked away, he would let her go, broken but honest. Because loving her meant risking everything. And for the first time, Kareem was ready to risk it all. The gala that night was smaller, quieter. A gathering of investors in a private hall rather than a ballroom filled with cameras. Still, Kareem felt the same restless tension coursing through him. He had made his choice. No more silence. No more pride. Tonight, he would speak his truth. Ayanna almost didn't come. She had tried to trade her shift, but no one was available. As she adjusted her uniform in the mirror before leaving home, she told herself she could manage one more evening of pretending he didn't matter. But her heart knew better. When she stepped into the hall, her breath caught. Kareem was already looking at her. Not as the feared billionaire CEO. Not as the man untouchable to the world. But as someone waiting, hoping, desperate. Ayanna's chest tightened. She quickly looked away, carrying her tray toward the guests. But the weight of his gaze followed her everywhere. Halfway through the evening, Kareem finally crossed the room. His footsteps were steady, his eyes locked on her. The murmur of conversations dimmed as though the air itself held its breath. Ayanna, he said softly. Her hand shook, but she set down her tray and faced him. What do you want? The room stilled. Dozens of eyes turned toward them. A repeat of Act 2, But this time Kareem didn't hide behind arrogance. He drew in a breath, his voice steady though his heart thundered. "What I want is you." The words sent ripples through the hall. A billionaire CEO, feared by all, bearing himself in front of everyone. Ayanna blinked, her chest tightening. "Don't do this here." "I have to," Kareem said, his voice breaking at the edges. "Because the last time we stood like this, I let pride destroy us. I said things that cut you because I was afraid. Afraid of what you made me feel. Afraid of how badly I needed you." The room was silent, every guest pretending not to watch though their ears strained. Ayanna's throat burned. "You don't know what you're asking of me." "I do," Kareem replied, his eyes unwavering. "I'm asking you to stand beside me. Not as staff, not as a scandal, not as anything the world tries to label you, but as the woman I love." The word hung in the air like thunder. Love. Ayanna's breath hitched. "You don't mean that," she whispered, though tears threatened her eyes. Kareem stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I've faced down governments, corporations, enemies who would kill to see me fall. But nothing has terrified me more than the thought of losing you. And if I have to kneel before you in front of this entire room to prove it, I will." Gasps rippled as Kareem bent one knee, the feared billionaire humbling himself at the feet of a waitress. Ayanna's tears spilled. This was no longer about the room, or the whispers, or the image. This was about a man who had been starved of love all his life, finally begging for it, finally choosing it. Her heart screamed to protect itself, to walk away. But deeper, louder, stronger, it whispered, "This is real. This is yours." Slowly, Ayanna reached for his hand, lifting him back to his feet. "You have no idea what kind of mess you're walking into," she whispered, voice trembling. Kareem's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Then let's walk into it together." The room erupted, whispers, gasps, stunned silence. But Ayanna didn't hear any of it. All she heard was the pounding of her heart as Kareem leaned closer, their foreheads touching, a promise passing between them without a word. Later, after the guests had dispersed and the night had thinned, they stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city. Ayanna leaned against the railing, her eyes still wet, her heart still unsteady. Kareem stood beside her, quieter than she had ever seen him. "You know," she said softly, "you ruined my whole plan." He frowned. "What plan?" She smiled weakly. "To get through this job invisible. To keep my head down, save money, help Malik. Not to fall for a man who makes the world stop every time he walks into a room." Kareem turned to her, his voice low. "And you ruined mine. I planned to stay untouchable. Untouchable men can't be hurt. But you saw me anyway." Their eyes locked, something unspoken settling between them. "You're still engaged," Ayanna said quietly. "Not for long," Kareem replied firmly. "That arrangement ends tomorrow. I won't live a lie when I've finally found the truth." Her chest tightened. "And what if the world tears us apart?" "Then let them try," Kareem said, taking her hand. "For the first time, I have something worth fighting for." Ayanna leaned into him, her tears spilling again, but this time they were not from pain. This time, they were from the terrifying, overwhelming relief of being chosen. And as Kareem's arms wrapped around her, she knew, love had come unexpected and uninvited, but exactly when she needed it most. They had shattered, they had broken, but now they were whole. Together. And so, the waitress who dared to humiliate the untouchable billionaire became the woman who taught him how to love. Their story wasn't easy, wasn't neat, but it was real. And in the end, real was enough. What about you? Do you believe love can cross worlds this far apart? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.